My beloved and esteemed sisters and brothers in Islam, and respected and honorable leaders and pioneers and imams and huffaz, and my beloved children and youths, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this beautiful day of Jum'ah. And we thank Him for the summer that we finally could have here in Toronto. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these days after Ramadan in the holy month of Shawwal, as we enter these sacred days before Hajj. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to live in Canada, a country that respects our diversity and religious freedom. I'm very, very honored, and I'm very humbled to be in the presence of so many of our stalwarts and elders and pioneers that I know here in this masjid. Uncle Mir is here, and many others that know me and I know. This is my first time I'm in this masjid giving khutbah. And first and foremost, I must say that I have a flood of emotions thinking that Malcolm X, rahimahullah, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, stood on these very lofty pedestals in the beginning of this masjid in 1969, and he shared his wisdom. He shared from the laurels of his treasures of wisdom, the nuggets of his wisdom, from these very sacred grounds here in Jama Masjid. And I'm indeed indebted to Malcolm X, rahimahullah, because when I read his autobiography, well, as a young man living in Guyana, I was inspired by him, and many of us have been inspired by him. But 15 years ago, I came to Canada and I gave the khutbah in a famous masjid in Toronto. And I quoted Malcolm X. And a man in the middle of the saf in the masjid, and some of you who have been there remember the story, he stood up and said, "Don't quote a non-Muslim in the house of God. Don't quote a non-Muslim in the house of Allah." And I could have challenged him, young and feisty, my blood boiling. I could have stood there and said, "How dare you?" But someone whisked me away to the office of the masjid, and he had the better of the day. But brothers and sisters, this is the ignorance that we have allowed ourselves to be part of, that we do not even know the history of our own Muslim tradition here in North America. Last night I was at a Canadian Muslim Vote Gala, and the foreign minister was sharing a story, again, which we know of, but we have not necessarily spread across Canada to our youths and our students and our congregants, that the first mosque was built in Canada. Of course, Jama Masjid is the first mosque in Toronto, coming out of Dundas Street. But the first mosque in 1935 that was built in Canada, Al-Rashid Mosque, the architect was Ukrainian. And how many people knew, just like the Jama Masjid when it started in Dundas Street, this Al-Rashid Mosque that started in Edmonton was a joint effort of Christians and Muslims who celebrated their birthdays or their nikah and their marriages and their family gatherings in the masjid basement. They celebrated their Eid, and they celebrated, the Christians came for their celebrations in Al-Rashid. It was a joint effort. But recently in Ramadan, I was invited to speak at a synagogue, and we called the azan in the synagogue. So beautiful. We broke bread and made iftar in the synagogue. And a Jewish woman said during question and answer time, she said, "Today you've been welcome in the synagogue." Would that the same be if the Jews come to the mosque? If the Jews wanted to use the mosque to have their Shabbat service on a Friday night, would that be the same? And you and me know that would not necessarily be the same. But brothers and sisters, I had to relate from the seerah, and I had to relate from the Islamic history I had to, as much as we do not have the practicum to back that up, I had to relate the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, 1400 years ago, he opened up the Masjid Nabawi in Medina to the Christians of Najran that came from Najran, Christian men and women and children. They prayed in the house of Allah. They worshipped in the house of Allah. Christians worshipped in the house of Allah. They slept, they ate, they were hosted, they cried, they argued, they debated with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the Trinity. They had a good time as the guests of the house of Allah. Owen Song recently had a synagogue next to a masjid. The synagogue could not have continued, so the masjid opened up its doors so that the synagogue could operate its Shabbat on a Friday night. But for many of you, you may not know that in Peterborough for the last 14, 15 years, I've been part of the Abraham Festival, where Jews come to the masjid on a Friday, and Christians go to the Shabbat, the synagogue, on a Friday night. And the Muslims, we go to the church on the Sunday service. And each other learn from each other. So when the masjid was firebombed last year, and the Prime Minister came, remember the story, he came to the masjid after it was repaired. I happened to be there in Peterborough, fundraising at a church for the Syrian refugees. And I remember clearly the person from the synagogue, after hearing about the arson of the masjid, came and said, "We are opening up the synagogue for Jummah so that the Muslims who cannot pray at the masjid could come and perform their Jummah prayers in the synagogue." That's what. What's that? That's the faith of Abraham. What's that? That's the faith of Muhammad and Moses and Jesus. What's that? That's the faith of the Mughal dynasty and the Turkish dynasty. And that's the faith of the majority of Muslims who are minorities in non-Muslim lands. In Lebanon, in India, in Guyana. We have always lived harmoniously with out-of-faith communities because that is the Islam that we know of. In Madinatul Munawwara, the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, when he arrived, he did not arrive with a Muslim majority with open arms and welcoming him that he could have an Islamic law imposed tomorrow morning. What he had? 500 Muslims only in 3 months. The majority were Quraysh. The majority were Christians and Jews. But what they did, they said, "Muhammad, you are a leader. You're the mayor of the town, you know." Or the mayor of London. Now we have a few mayors in Canada, if you're not aware of it. Laklavish, the mayor is Lebanese, is Muslim. Not only London has that. And he said, fine. They signed an agreement, a convention that says, if Medina should be attacked, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, the atheists, the Aus and the Khazraj and the Quraysh, whoever is living in Medina, citizens, they have to come together and protect the city of Medina. As Torontonians, we have an equal duty to protect Canada and Toronto. Good. But the Jews could practice their faith. The Muslims could practice their faith. The Christians could practice their faith. That's multiculturalism. That's pluralism that Canada has, and that's the pluralism that Islam established 1400 years ago. But from time to time, we know we have to deal with some radical elements who do not see it that way. So I have been working in the prison for the last 10 years, and I was interviewed on Global TV yesterday. Give us a story of someone who accepts Islam in the prison. And I said, of course I have lots of stories. But what about this story? 2 Ramadan ago, a young man who's a white supremacist out of Toronto, touched from his head to his feet. He's loaded with tats. Teardrop. Gang signs. He has done it all. You know what I mean? He has been around the turf and back. And he hated anyone that doesn't look with his skin tone. He was ready to hurt anyone that came in his path that does not match his skin tone. And he saw some Muslims fasting in Ramadan 2 Ramadans ago. He said, man, no water, no food, no smoke. What's going on? You guys are crazy. He said, no, yeah, we're Muslims.